So the Charlotte Maxeke Academic Hospital is facing heavy criticism amid allegations of food shortages, as well as a lack of hot water in parts of the facility. According to a report in the Daily Maverick, food supplies for Gauteng's hospitals are located in Limpopo and the Free State. Gauteng DA Shadow Health MEC Jack Bloom is raising concern about the contracts. He's described them as suspicious, and he's also calling for the resignation of the hospital CEO, Gladys Bogoshi. Let's talk about it with Jack now. Jack, good morning. As always, welcome to the program and thank you for your time. You've called the food contracts fishy. What specifically about these deals with suppliers in Limpopo and the Free State is raising red flags for you?
For some time now, we've had supply disruptions for food at various hospitals, including Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Hospital. And the puzzle is why something as easily available as food is a problem for the Gauteng Health Department to procure on a reliable basis. Now, it turns out that some of the contracts are with Limpopo and with the Free State. Now, why on earth are we actually getting bread from Limpopo and basic groceries from the Free State? And I think it's part of the problem why we're having supply disruptions today, including today. I've just had a patient sending me a text about not getting food at the Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Hospital. You know, I think there's just frankly corruption in these contracts. That's why we don't get a reliable, steady, value for money supply of food, which is basic, and they really should be sourcing that locally. So here's a major hospital, Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Hospital. As we speak, they don't have hot water. They're getting porridge and bread for supper, and it's a crisis. And it's gone on for a long time, and it's time it stopped. And the DA is of the view that we get a new CEO for this hospital, because staff will tell you that there's very little communication about what happens in that hospital, and there's long-standing problems. They haven't fully recovered from the devastating fire some years ago. And it's a major hospital that needs decent top-class leadership.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, to respond to the department's claim that all patients are receiving 3 meals a day. Staff and patients are saying, they want to be discharged because they're not getting any food. And you've just shared with us now a text message that you've got from a patient who's saying that they haven't been fed. So the question of who's telling the truth, I think you've answered. If the patients themselves are saying we're not being fed, there's a serious problem there. You're calling for the CEO's resignation. What exactly has Gladys Bogoshi failed to do that justifies her removal after over a decade of being in charge?
Well, first of all, there's been absolutely no accountability for the devastating fire at that hospital some years ago. There was a police investigation, and they did suspect arson. But, never mind the fire, which they also found, of course, that there weren't adequate fire prevention measures, which, of course, I think the CEO is responsible for. But the recovery from the fire, I mean, the fact that they don't have hot water for several weeks now is because of the deteriorating infrastructure in the hospital. And there's still a parking crisis. Now, you might say, well, parking is just an inconvenience. It's not actually. For elderly and sick patients, they have to walk at long distances because the parking garages are still not fixed at that hospital. I'm just taking it as one of many problems at the hospital, but it's actually a serious one for people who if they miss appointments because they can't get parking at the hospital. And then staff will tell you that there's very little communication. Operations are cancelled because there's vacancies for anaesthetists. There's actually a staffing freeze, and there's equipment that's broken. There's so many stresses at this hospital that the CEO has not come to grips with over many years now, that it's time for a change. And I think basic accountability for the failures that led up to the fire, to prevent it, and fixing up the hospital, restoring all services, that hasn't happened. And I would say that the present CEO should go, and let's get a really good person who can communicate with staff and fix up the long-standing problems at that hospital. The fact that we've had several food disruptions over the years, that's unforgivable. And laundry, something as basic as laundry. They cancel operations because they don't have clean laundry. Now, how can that happen at a flagship hospital hospital or any hospital for that matter. Surely, top leadership is to blame, and there needs to be a change in that regard.
It does beg a belief, Jack, that a major academic hospital has to boil water to wash its patients. Given the existing problems at the hospital, you mentioned the fire there, what should the contingency planning have been to support the provision of essential infrastructure?
Well, that's for a decent CEO to put these plans in place. Clearly, there's problems with Gauteng Health food contracts, and food is easily obtainable. I think the claim that they say patients are getting 3 meals a day, well, they're getting 3 meals a day of bread and porridge. They need nutritious food. People are recovering from surgery. People, need decent food, and for a hospital to just give them absolutely whatever they can scrounge around for is unforgivable, to be honest. So I think it's a multi-layered problem. There's problems with the Gauteng Health Department as well. But I really think that a CEO would have, certainly it's the easiest thing is a contingency plan for dirty laundry, because you could get private laundries. Of course, you could get private food contractors. That should be very easy to arrange. And the deteriorating infrastructure of the hospitals, which is the reason why they don't have hot water as we speak today, that also should have been attended to. So the leadership is lacking at that hospital. Staff are really at their wits' ends. If you see the sort of text messages that I've got from various doctors, and some of them have phoned me, they're at their wits' ends. Something needs to change at that hospital, and it needs to start now.
The common refrain we would hear, I assume, is around a lack of resources. What's your understanding, Jack, of having watched developments at Charlotte Maxeke Hospital around resource provision? In other words, is this just about bad decision making? As you say, some of these service providers aren't even in the province of Gauteng, or is it because they don't have money?
Frankly, I think we have a sufficiently large budget if it was properly spent. We've already seen the extent of the corruption in our Gauteng health services. The SIU found that Tembisa Hospital alone, that's a sort of mid-sized hospital with a smaller budget than Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Hospital. 3 billion rand was misspent over 3 years. And I can tell you, I think there's similar waste and corruption at Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Hospital. Initially after the fire, there was an inexcusable delay because the Gauteng provincial government brought in the Gauteng Department of Infrastructure Development to do the repairs. And of course, they failed utterly. So it had to be handed over to the National Department of Health and the Development Bank of South Africa. Now, that's an example of just wasted resources, and time was wasted as well. And the fact that the hospital isn't fully repaired as we speak, I think is very wrong. So if you took the existing budget, you spent it properly, and you got rid of all these scams and the wastage and overpriced food contracts and security. I complained some years ago that they were spending 30 million rand a year on security at Charlotte Maxeke Hospital. Now I asked a question, I found out it's 72 million rand that they're spending on hospital security. I think that's a ripoff. Surely you don't need to spend that much on security. You could get effective security for, I'm sure, a lot less than that. But I think there's corruption. I think we're overpaying for certain things. And if you just spent properly, rationally, got rid of all the rip-offs, I think we could provide a far better service. And it starts with the top management accountability, putting the right people in the right jobs, and making sure that the patients come first. That's what it's all about. Unfortunately, our flagship hospital, patients, the experience there is not what it should be. You can go there this morning and you'll find terribly long queues as well.
Jack, we'll certainly get a right of reply from Charlotte Maxeke Hospital and from the CEO herself, because we must, and ask her about some of these issues that you're raising as well with regard to the provision of a professional and healthy service for all of those who use that hospital.